Hi, welcome to Valley News Digest. I'm John Gregg, the news editor of the Valley News, the daily paper for the Upper Valley. We're based in West Lebanon. We've been around since 1952 and cover most of Windsor and Orange counties in Vermont and most of Sullivan and Grafton counties in New Hampshire, plus statewide issues in the two states. We're also on the web, of course, at vnews.com. This is our third episode, and the Digest is a chance to give you viewers a sort of more of an inside look at what we're doing at the paper, and also to meet some of our reporters and photographers. Joining us first is our healthcare reporter, Nora Doyle-Burr, who has done several stories about a major issue and lawsuit at Dartmouth College, which has had a big impact on the school's reputation. Nora, welcome.
Thank you.
Let's go back a little ways. Back in June and July, three professors from the same department at Dartmouth College either resigned or retired after they were under investigation both by Dartmouth and by the New Hampshire Attorney General's office. What happened there?
Yes, that's right. So the three professors, Todd Heatherton, Paul Whalen, and Bill Kelly, all left the school in June and July after an internal investigation by the school, although the internal investigation led the school to determine that they ought to be terminated, and that they elected to leave the school before that could happen.
And they're all in the
Yes.
Department of Brain Psychology?
Yes, it's called Psychological and Brain Sciences.
Yeah,
So,
and fully tenured professors, and I think
Correct.
Todd Heatherton was the chairman.
He had been, yes.
Yeah, and there were allegations of sexual misconduct.
There were.
Yeah, and Dartmouth was always very thin on giving the details on exactly what had transpired.
Correct.
But at the time when Heatherton retired, he did issue a statement saying what?
So at the time he left, he acknowledged acting unprofessionally at conferences while intoxicated. And he didn't go into details, but other sort of national publications had reported some groping incidents or alleged groping incidents in 2002.
Yeah, okay. And then a lot more details or allegations surfaced a couple of weeks ago in mid-November when 7 of these female science students, or who had been, most of them are still at Dartmouth, filed a $70 million class action lawsuit against Dartmouth. What did they say happened?
Yes, so their allegations are pretty wide-ranging. Primarily, they involve sort of a culture of drinking. They would all go out together, and there was some pressure that the women felt pressure from the professors to go out drinking in order to advance their careers.
Many of them were research assistants, graduate research assistants?
Most were graduate students. There was one undergraduate also. And the allegations also included sexting, and in allegations against Kelly and Whalen, there were allegations of rape also.
Right, which would, and that is certainly probably one of the reasons why, with that allegation, that the Attorney General's office they are still investigating that from what they've
They're
said.
still investigating it. We don't know anything really in detail about what that investigation entails or when it might be completed.
Yeah. Now, 2 of the former professors, Kelly and Whalen, really haven't responded publicly to any of the allegations. Right. Heatherton again put out a statement. What was he asserting?
Yes, so he acknowledges that that drinking happened, although he really says that none of the women in this suit were graduate students of his, and that none of his actions were sexual, that they were sort of mistakes that happened while he was drinking at conferences, not related to the the work directly.
Sure, although in the lawsuit itself, it's clear that some of the plaintiffs interpreted those actions differently than he is casting them.
I think that's right, and they also, I mean, sort of the big picture that's painted is of this culture that tolerated sexual behavior, inappropriate behavior towards women, primarily.
Yeah. And I think the lawsuit used the phrase animal house or predatory animal house, something like that, which is a very loaded phrase too with Dartmouth, because the original animal house, of course, was based at a fraternity at Dartmouth decades ago.
Yeah.
Now, Nora, you talked to a couple of these plaintiffs, a couple of the women. What are their concerns? What did they have to say? Not only just these allegations, but there's a broader issue here to them, yes?
Yeah. I mean, I think, yes, the lawsuit is seeking $70 million, but I think that in talking to them, their primary goal is really to try to shift the culture at Dartmouth, but also in academia. So as scientists in training, they're reliant on their professors, or they call them mentors, to teach them and sort of guide their research so that they can be successful, get published, and hopefully, I think, get tenure track positions either at Dartmouth or elsewhere. And it doesn't, the current structure, the hierarchy as it exists now, doesn't really give room for students to report freely when they're uncomfortable or they don't feel supported by their professors. And so that's something they hope that the culture will change as a result of this lawsuit.
Yeah. During some of your good reporting back in the summer, I think a friend of one of the plaintiffs had told you, for instance, about the sexting allegation.
Yes.
And we had Dartmouth College President Phil Hanlon for an editorial board meeting after that, and we asked about that, and he said he wasn't going to comment on any part of that investigation. But more broadly, what has Dartmouth said and President Hanlon said, especially once this lawsuit was filed? Yeah,
so I mean, they've sort of stood by the fact that they conducted this internal investigation, which they feel was fair to all parties, and they are pursuing a campus-wide sexual misconduct policy that would apply to all students, faculty, visitors. So I guess they feel like they're making the changes that need to be made. In direct response to the lawsuit, they've sort of denied any allegations that the college knew about some of these things and failed to act. And they also feel that the complaints could be resolved without court involvement.
Yeah, and as we're taping this in late November, to our knowledge, the college has not yet filed their formal legal response to the lawsuit. But just to go back, I think before, weren't there sort of two tracks? Things would be treated separately if there was an allegation of sexual misconduct involving a student versus involving a professor. And are they proposing to sort of treat those the same now? Is that one of the things?
I think that's a proposal. My understanding is that they're currently soliciting community input into whatever this plan is, but that, yes, it would be one consistent policy. I mean, they have a lot of different schools with different administrators, so I think that this would apply across undergraduates, graduates, professors. And
I think they've also talked about they're going to have mandatory sort of comprehensive training for people at the college to presumably or to perhaps ward off such future behavior if there is that.
Yes. So, I mean, one of our reporters went out more recently and did talk to some undergraduates, and they said that, and these were freshmen, and they said that they had some training recently in terms of how to report or how to recognize these types of sexual misconduct activities.
That was Jared Pendak, another reporter, and he talked to them, and I think it sounded like certainly the students were unsettled by the allegations.
Sure.
But they themselves said they hadn't experienced anything to that extent themselves. I think.
Well, yes, and although he did speak with some two students who declined to share their names, and they did say that they had seen some examples of misogyny.
Yeah.
They didn't provide examples.
Yeah, well, and that's obviously, that's something we're going to be following a lot more, and the whole country is going to be watching this lawsuit, I think, because it's some serious allegations that are involved there. We're going to take a quick break right now and then be joined by photographer James Patterson, and Nora is graciously going to stay and also talk about a major mental health, continuing story about mental health care in New Hampshire. Welcome back to Valley News Digest. We're joined now by photographer James Patterson, along with reporter Nora Doyle-Burr, who stayed on. I was going to make a joke about James being here at the table without a camera, one of the first times you'll ever see him without a camera, but he actually has brought them with him, of course. But James also, besides being a photographer, truly is, in what he does, one of our best reporters. And James has been talking to and photographing a woman from Sullivan County named Mandy Dube for the last 8 years. James, tell us a little bit about her and what drew you to her and who she is.
I actually met her through a story you were doing, and that was in 2010, and she was 21. And really it was through her mother, Louise, who was extremely concerned about her condition. She had just come out of, was it the Connecticut Valley House? It was kind of a residential center run by West Central Behavioral Health. And
in Claremont.
In Claremont. And they had closed down due to budget cuts from the state. And so Mandy was living in an apartment on her own and having a lot of it was a struggle transitioning from kind of the institutional environment to living on her own. And she had been in and out of residential placements since she was about 8 years old, I think.
She figured prominently in a New Hampshire lawsuit. Nora can tell us, why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, the Disability Rights Center filed a lawsuit on behalf of Mandy and others who were either at risk or were staying in the state's sort of institutions for treating people with serious mental illness, including New Hampshire Hospital, and the Glen Cliff Home, which is more of a nursing home facility. And so that was filed in 2012 and then was settled in 2014 through a community mental health agreement in which the state agreed to provide a range of community supports for people with serious mental illness, like Mandy, to allow them to live in the community successfully without needing these sorts of inpatient treatment. So that includes a range of things, community sort of teams of counselors and other mental health providers that are able to go out to give care to patients at their homes or other community places, both in emergencies and also to sort of find people who may be homeless or otherwise unable to attend therapy sessions in an office environment. The supportive housing is also included in there.
And there's a question as to really New Hampshire is fully abided by the medal in terms of the settlement.
Yeah, I think there are these semi-annual reports by sort of an outside party, and they indicate the state's making progress, but no, not in complete compliance with that 2014 agreement.
Yeah, we caught up with Mandy again this fall. James, first, you've been in regular touch with with her, but we caught up with her. Tell us a little bit, can you flesh out just sort of exactly what she is dealing with, and then in terms of a mental health diagnosis, and then what did we find?
Right.
What's her circumstances now? She's living, I think, in Unity now, right?
Yes, yeah. So Mandy's, at this point, she's 29. Her mental health diagnoses include bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, as well as post-traumatic stress disorder. And yes, you're right that one of her symptoms is that she cuts herself sort of as a way of fighting suicidal urges. And that had abated for some time, but then the stress recently related to her move to Unity sort of brought that back. So yes, in some ways, she's doing well at this point. She and her boyfriend Chris recently moved into their own home in Unity. They had some assistance through New Hampshire Community Loan Fund, and also her family, which has been really supportive.
Yeah. But she's still hopeful. I mean, she's living in a remote area. She
Yes.
thinks and believes that the state should be able to reach out to her and get someone there,
Yeah.
for instance, if she's going through a mental health crisis, right?
Right, yes, yeah. So currently, the Upper Valley does not have access to these mobile crisis teams, though the Community Mental Health Agreement has resulted in some of those teams being established in the southern part of the state. They have not come up this far north at this point.
Yeah. What's remarkable, I think, about this story is that Mandy has really let James and our reporters into her life to talk to her, photograph her, chronicle her, and we've also, James mentioned her mother Louise, and I think some of the things that James's photographs especially show is that, a mental health issue like this really affects the whole family, and Louise has very much been part of that as well. I mean, what do you tell people about Mandy? You followed her for a long time, what do you...
Her things have improved for her on one level, but she still finds a lot of frustration with the kind of care and services she's been able to get for mental health. She's been struggling with dissociations and some of the stress of the move.
Why is it that she lets you be there when she's doing through all sorts of things? I mean, it's...
I think Louise, her mother, is a really strong example. Louise was really, I think, kind of calling out for help when we first met her, and she felt that by sharing her story, sharing her daughter's story, that maybe they could get the help that they needed, and also kind of get those supports for other people that find themselves in that situation. And so back in 2010, Mandy was really focusing on her own struggles, but last year she lost a friend to suicide, and I think she really kind of found her voice through her mom's example in, actively calling her legislators and Governor Sununu's administration to kind of ask them to be accountable for some of the advancements that were promised through the resolution of the lawsuit.
Yeah.
So I think it's her mother's example that kind of allowed her to see that by sharing her story, she can help herself and help others.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's both for her and I think for other people struggling with mental illness.
Yeah, I mean, no question. I mean, with Mandy, I mean, she put herself front and center as a lead plaintiff in that lawsuit. I mean, and it's important, I think, for people to understand the issue, that there's a human face to challenges like this, and Mandy clearly has has been that. One other thing about Louise, I think that you guys discovered is that, so when we first met her in 2010, she was working for a bank in Charlestown. Now she's doing something different with her career. What's she doing?
Yeah, she works for Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center. She's a project manager, and I think will finish her PhD in 6 months.
And is that in counseling related?
It's in project management.
Okay.
Yeah, she's more on the administrative side, I think.
Yeah, okay. All right. And James, this isn't the first time you have done extensive work profiling an individual or one person to try and tell a broader story. You also were with a Claremont area man named Alan Graves, who was homeless for quite a time, did a long series of stories with him, have kept in touch with him. What do you think you tell people through your work with these, telling these sort of stories through photography, and also what draws you to tell the stories of people like Alan or Mandy?
I like to listen to people, and sometimes people have a lot to tell me. And we walk through our lives kind of maybe with our own preconceptions that help us navigate the world. But when you take a moment to listen to someone and observe their life and try to understand where they're coming from, you gain a new perspective.
Yep. I mentioned earlier that James is really a fine reporter, along with his great photographs. And it was James who, a year and a half ago, was photographing a basketball game, a playoff game at Rivendell High School, and he noticed a man wandering around with a handgun on his holster, open carry, and it turned out it was a state representative who said he'd been sort of asked by the school to provide security at the game. And we dug into that. James had these great photographs. And it really sparked a pretty major look at the fact that New Hampshire doesn't have the same laws that Vermont and other states do to prevent adults from carrying a handgun into school. And in fact, it even became a little bit of a campaign issue this year. With Democrats in control now, they may take up again. But anyway, the stories we've been talking about and the photographs are on the web at vnews.com. There'll be more, of course, in the paper, which you can get every day. And I want to thank Nora and James for joining us. Thank you for watching Valley News Digest. And we'll be back in another month. And, of course, James is taking my picture.